Okay, welcome everybody. Hi, welcome to the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum monthly Talk Stories series. I'm Erwin Mino. I'm the president of the FANHS National Museum. I'd like to introduce Christopher Natividad, grandson of a Delano Manong, his on his mother's side. Christopher's a little background about Christopher. His grandpa was a Sakata. He came to the United States in 19, or actually to Hawaii in 1927, 28, and 29. He was in Stockton, was a farm laborer, um, answered the call to duty to be in the 1st Philippine Infantry. Um, his grandpa was a little torn because one, he had to serve, he wanted to serve for the United States Army. However, he had family over back in the Philippines, and if found out, it would be a lot of really bad repercussions. So fast forward, uh, Christopher's grandpa was 1st Philippine Infantry, served and helped liberate the Philippines, met his grandma, and in 1954, they migrated over with his mom, his aunt, and his uncle to what is known as Ducor, just a little bit northeast of Delano. Christopher's grandpa was a foreman for 2 farm labor camps. And that's a little bit of the background that I grew up in and his mom grew up in. Um, anyway, so with that, Christopher, there was a huge message that these Manongs would give. And because of all the discrimination and all the cards stacked against them, they quickly figured out that, through leveling the playing ground through education was the way to go. And having said that, your mom was probably one of the biggest advocates in the family. So having said that, Christopher, you are now a founder of an artificial intelligence company. You've rung the New York Stock Exchange bell, and you are now probably a very inspirational figure in the next generation Y. So welcome, Christopher. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your company?
Thank you, Erwin. Yeah, everyone, I'm just really grateful for all the work uh, the group at the Filipino American National Historical Society and the museum have done. Very important, and as Erwin mentioned, I'm a double Cal Bear, but was one of the first students at UC Berkeley of Don Mabalam's Asian American History 124 class. So, education in the Filipino community, finding ways to give back are things that I'm very much still involved with. I'm a guest lecturer at times, more in the investment space for UC Berkeley and San Diego State. But again, really excited to be here to tell you a little bit about the story, some of the different things that inspired me. Some of the troubles, some of the different areas that I've seen within the community that we see as opportunities for growth, and really just have a really open discussion. And for those of you new to Zoom or able to, whenever or at any point throughout this discussion, there's a chat button at the bottom of the screen. If there are any questions, we do this at the university level. Feel free to click there and type in a question. And as I'm going through some of the story, and some of the prepared remarks, I'm happy to tackle those types of questions. And again, um, I really appreciate the strong introduction about my grandfather. I still feel very much that I stand on the shoulder of giants, right? As Erwin mentioned, Silvino was, a member of that first Filipino regiment in the 1940s, Purple Heart recipient during World War II. And he emigrated with his family to Delano, California, where he worked in the fields for the majority of his life, right? And so his perspective on some of the life experiences with discrimination, having some of those difficult choices to leave the places that you've known your entire life, to do new things, very challenging. But that those stories that were shared with me, were tremendously helpful in the sense that, you know, I was able to look at what others had done, other family members, other people like me have done, and found some of the strength to go ahead and enter into some of these areas that are not, very honestly, not well participated or not well represented by the Filipino community. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Again, it's a brief deck, but we like to show more so than tell, and so we have some different visuals and trying to align today's monthly discussion with the museum's mission, right? Promoting the narrative of Filipino Americans through preservation, inspiration, education. And when I see that, right, I think about taking it a step further and what does that do, right? What does that mean beyond just depicting, and putting out these types of information, right? How can we kind of share and learn and talk and discuss and grow from someone like my story, or like how we can utilize the stories that are represented by those in the museum, right, to further the community. And so, from the preservation component, I really thought of preserve and honor, right? There aren't many large public leaders, that are Filipino. When I was growing up, now we have, a handful, but by and large, we're not strongly represented in the corporate space, in athletics, even in the media, right? So there's a huge importance as far as being able to share and understand the significance of family history, right? Where you come from, what are some of the lessons that are learned, right? Because when you go into an area of or a profession or a school and you're not surrounded by people that look, think, act, or have similar values to you, where do you pull that strength? And quite honestly, I've been looking at some of the data and speaking to some of the younger students. Mental health is a huge issue in today's youth, and specifically the young Filipino American population. So I feel that all the work that the museum and the historic society is doing is tremendously important, as individuals are able to explore their past and learn more about others that have walked a similar path. So there is that data that shows that there's psychological benefits of understanding one's family background, and then just knowing all the different things that my grandfather faced, as a farm laborer, or even being injured in the war, right? And it helps provide perspective in the sense that, hey, maybe what I'm going as a younger Filipino American, maybe it isn't as bad, right? Maybe it gives me the courage to say, if grandma and grandpa were able to do this, then I can do more, right? And so I was fortunate enough to have some very strong role models, uncles and aunts that had completed higher levels of education. And this is a picture, for reference of my grandmother and grandfather as they emigrated from the Philippines to Delano. And then another of the family picture that I just thought I'd share, once again, showing, not telling. It's always nice to see some of the older pictures as we talk about uh, the people within my story. But the woman in yellow, the top row with the white collar, is my mother, Carmela Mina Natividad, and both her and my father worked in the fields in Delano, and with my grandmother, were very repetitive in the sense of reminding me that, hey, you need to do well. You need to get an education, right? You need to, so you can find a good job, and take care of yourself, and you won't have to work as hard as we did. And I share these pictures because I think there's so many important things. that words just don't do justice. And you look at the hands of these older generations, and when I have these discussions with older Filipinos, you know, everyone has this unique story to tell, and that's why I think there's so much value in the Filipino American National Historic Society and the museum, right? Capturing this diverse set of stories, because it's not widely publicized, because so few of us are or actually become, the leaders in their respective fields. But again, I think I was able to harness so much of the support, love, and support by the members of my family. Sharing and taking in these stories to heart, and being able to kind of go through them, and use that as kind of a springboard, if you will, to kind of push me to do a little bit better. So I grew up actually in San Jose, California, before it was. Completely built out. I'd say, it's one of the highest areas, highest priced areas in terms of real estate, in terms of square foot, and it's the population's absolutely exploded because of the tech companies, institutions of higher education, as well as like the biotech companies, all within that area. And so it's also a financial hub and the like. So I got to see that area explode firsthand, right? And so it was a unique time in the area because it was quite diverse, from the perspective of looking at the different schools that I attended. There wasn't an overwhelming ethnic majority, if you will. It was, as I mentioned, quite diverse with Filipino, Japanese, Spanish, Mexican, white, black individuals that I'm still quite close to in a variety of different areas, and diverse from the socioeconomic perspective as well. Um, but I had the luxury of being raised by two parents that started out in the fields, but were able to complete uh, their undergraduate degrees. My mother from Cal State LA, and my father from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And so it was almost an expectation that you're gonna do better, right? Or that's you're gonna go to college, right? But that's not for everyone. That's not something that everyone knows. But one thing I remember, my grandfather, in his stories, and my grandmother, repeating again, it's like education, that's something no one can ever take from you, and that was off the back of stories when farmers hadn't paid those that worked in the field what they were due, so they took some of the crop home to feed the family. But and that's why that education component was so meaningful. Hearing these types of stories. And so I was graduated at the top of my class as valedictorian in high school, as student body president, captain of the baseball team. I was quite active in doing a lot of different things because you know I felt support. I felt I couldn't lose. I had a lot of confidence from the support of family, right? That was my immediate community, and I felt that there wasn't anything that I couldn't do. So I ended up being admitted and choosing UC Berkeley as my undergraduate institution. This was after affirmative action, so it was quite a polarized time, and it was an interesting time for the Filipino American community because the numbers had shrank significantly. And I was an intern for one of the student groups there, PASS, which is the Filipino Academic Studies for Student Services organization. And it still exists today, focusing on diversity, recruitment, and retention issues and efforts. And so um, I really felt, it was a great way to meet other, Filipinos, meet other people in general. From coming from a relatively smaller community to a big school like UC Berkeley, I thought it was a nice way to meet others, and just whether it's going out to grab a bite to a local place, or grabbing a drink. I thought those types of organizations are extremely important. And when I think about the museums and continuing initiatives, I think, and hearing about the support and the functions happening um, with San Jose State yesterday, it makes me really happy because one thing I've noticed with some of these other Filipino organizations, especially those related to some of the field workers and in other areas like Delano and Stockton, they often fade out because there's a lack of supply of renewed interest, right? So connecting generations through these different forms of storytelling, also very important. So again, I applaud the museum for those efforts. And so, um, before I go on past my colleges, I do want to take a moment to reflect on Dawn Mabalan and her teachings. It was the my absolute favorite class at UC Berkeley because it exposed me to the diversity even within the Filipino community. Right, getting to the chance to listen to the stories of others. It also allowed me to um, complete a final project I don't think I would have ever taken unless it was part of a college course, and I was able to complete a documentary and capture some of my family's story because that was so encouraged by Dawn. You know, it was one of my fondest memories as well that she took us to the Stockton asparagus farms where her family had history working, and she had students picking asparagus to get a taste and understand, the tough conditions and the farm labor experience that those in the community had went through before us. And so overall, there's always been this continued appreciation from my perspective on the prior generations of Filipinos, right? And so um, when I think about the different forms and different challenges that I've faced through my education, having the perspective and knowing the stories of what those others who had faced that are documented in some of the stories by like Bulasan, right? And some of the different movements and things captured in excerpts, even related to the Cesar Chavez, farm laborer movement, and more importantly, so it's the individual stories from my parents and grandparents about the struggles that they face. So, you know, um, I think these are some of the things that really allowed me to take what was going on with my life, take a deep breath, and move forward. And so I graduated with 2 degrees from the University of California at Berkeley, one in rhetoric and the other from the Haas School of Business. And I was fortunate enough to get a job with the largest publicly traded asset manager at the time, which was Franklin Templeton. I had a passion for and visions of how, wondering how people were making all this money, right, and chasing money. And so I wanted to see what some of these other individuals were doing, and it was tough because I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a cohort of colleagues that looked like me or understood, what I was going through in different, cultural phases of my life. But it was a place where I could learn another area of the business, how to buy and trade and sell different things like stocks and bonds and commodities, and helping understand how economics can open up a lot of different options for people. And so um, I thought it was a great experience. And for a first job, I thought it offered me a great deal of perspective. And it wasn't until the financial crisis hit in 2009 that I was actually laid off from my job. And I thought, well, how could this be? My parents had worked at their companies for 30 plus years. They'd worked for one company their entire life. What the heck am I going to do? And for someone that had always kind of been around the top, it was tough. So I took the time, and again, it's like, well, if grandma and grandpa could go through those different things, and it's not like I'm going to stop. There was never any quit, right, within any of the family stories. So I said, what would I want to do? And I was like, well, I think this is around the time when there were some of those Jason Bourne movies coming out. So I'll try to become an FBI agent. At the same time, I looked at who's the biggest global bank at the time, and that was Goldman Sachs. And so I applied to both. I pushed to try to meet with different individuals associated with the different organizations. And after a few months of being unemployed, I had job offers in my hand for to be a special agent with the FBI or to work for Goldman Sachs out in London. And coming full circle to um, the story and honoring and preserving the history of our ancestors and my grandparents. It's like, hey, they moved to America for a better life for me, without even, without, any notion of me being around at that point in time, but having that perspective um, and the courage to leave everything they've known. That's something that gave me the strength to take the leap to move across the country to over to London, an area where, compared to California, it has significantly worse weather and weather conditions that I frankly was never accustomed to, and so I thought that was a tremendous experience for me as I got to visit so many of the different areas that I'd only read about in books, right? Living and working out in central London was an absolute uh, pain, but also a pleasure. Pain in the sense that I was working a lot, right? And working a lot of hours to try to make a good deal of money, and to get to where I thought I wanted to be from a professional standpoint, and a pleasure in the sense that it was a hub of Europe, so I could visit so many of the different amazing places, do so many different things that I always wanted to do. Drink, have a beer at Oktoberfest, try an Irish coffee. Go to Dublin, see Greece. Get communion over at Vatican City and have pasta in Rome. Right. I mean, those were some of the unique treats and things I was able to meet people that were local to those areas and that would actually show me around. And so that experience to me was a, a huge opportunity and a great way for me to appreciate the difference in how other people lived. And so that brings me to the next section and part that was listed as far as the inspiration to inspire and engage, right? And when we think about the mission of the museum and the historical society as a whole, um, where do we get this inspiration? How do we inspire? How do we further engage, right? And I think that's why it was such an honor to be here with you today to kind of uh, engage and share my story, hoping that maybe if there's a single part of what I shared today, that it helps inspire maybe a next generation or maybe some of the older members to say, hey, let me have a discussion with someone in the community about that's shown interest in my old profession, right? Or how can I look at some of the different things in a different way? Meaning, Chris is going to talk about artificial intelligence. Should I know what this is? And should what does this mean for me? Are there things about an investment space that hey, maybe I can ask Chris about? That's one thing I've learned is that the knowledge, the level of knowledge available to people is not even. In, in the reason why I kind of started up my company is because most of the largest financial institutions don't cater and wouldn't have even opened the door to folks like my grandmother or my grandfather, right? Let alone my mother and father, right? And so I realized I took a look in the mirror and said, I'm working for these multi-billion-dollar companies and helping them make more billions. What else can I do? And so, I was offered the opportunity to come closer back to home. I worked out over in Reno, Nevada for Apple. At the time, their treasurer asked me, do you think you'd want to help me shovel snow? And I thought that was an interesting comment because they said, we're going to have a new technology. And this was just before Apple had released their iPad. And so they were managing hundreds of billions of dollars, and my portion to manage was north of 30 billion. And within that space, I was one of the most sought after traders to meet with in the fixed income space or bond space. And so I was managing a multi-asset class portfolio for Apple while working in while living out in Reno, Nevada. And so the shoveling the snow part was an understatement. The amount of press and people trying to stake out our office to see who was involved in the space. And so I thought it was again a huge honor to have the trust at my age at the time to say, "Hey, here's the keys to our $30 billion car. Can you help us with it?" And so some of the notable things I helped Apple with were raising the funds to help them buy Dr. Dre's Beats. And if you ever buy the Apple campus over in Cupertino, I helped raise and trade some of the different securities to help raise the cash for them to pay for their spaceship campus. So that was pretty cool. But something was still kind of missing for me, right? And it goes back to that importance of education for me, right? And then that message that was shared by my parents and grandparents, and no one in my family at the time had a master's degree. And so, I met some of my best friends at Berkeley, and I thought, hey, why don't I apply? So it was the top ranked part-time MBA program at the time. And I went to the Haas School of Business again to get my MBA. And there I made some lifelong friends and connections with some of the professors there. And that's why I still guest lecture for the investment courses over at Berkeley. But it's also the location of where I met my co-founders to my business. And so what you see me here is standing on top of the podium on the left, um, and that was the day when we rang the New York Stock Exchange opening bell. Our flagship product was AIEQ. It's the ticker, stock ticker on the ETF. And fast forward to today, our group is managing over $4 billion in global assets for different large companies like HSBC, Deutsche Bank, but we've made a product accessible to people who want to buy as little as like a pennies a share on some of these other discount brokerages. So there's a way those that are interested can invest regardless of their economic status. And that's one of the things I know is interesting, right? From from you know as long as I can remember, it was always make money and then save it, put it in the bank, and actually there are some things a lot of them diet, but also some financial right advice that comes from older generations that aren't right. So this causes sometimes friction with different generations of Filipinos, right? But one of the things I like to help with is education and helping others manage whether it's their retirement or helping them manage their first paycheck as far as spending and things like that. And I would do all that just free, just because I know how difficult it can be with all the information around out there. And so the very nature of our company, or the company that I co-founded, is we utilize IBM Watson and technology to aggregate all of the data that's out there. So all the different pricing movements and news articles and social media and tweets, and how are people feeling about certain stocks, to try to help identify opportunities, right, on which stocks to buy and when to buy them, right. And so we feel that it's just like a lot of the different areas of artificial intelligence and technology. It's still evolving and it's still going to grow and continue to improve. But we're actually the first company to do that. So in kind of the technology history books and a lot of these different industry thought leaders, this is a space where our team is quite proud and quite well represented. So again, we've been picked up by hundreds of different news and social articles, everything from the likes of Business Insider, Forbes, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, etc. So, again, it's been a real treat to kind of share those clippings and get the additional credibility. On the right is my reason for inspiration, and kind of the thing, that the fear of the unknown is, I have a little 2-year-old daughter named Celine, and I know, what I do. I want to leave different stories of my grandparents behind, of some of the unique challenges and unique things that I've done for her, so that way she's inspired to do something, if even if it's not something that's kind of that traditional realm, right? I know when I after I recently got married, I told my mother-in-law that I was going to quit my job and try to start something else, and for a Filipino mom is like, why are you going to do that? It's a great job, right? So fast forward today, she's happy to where how it's turned out, right? That things have gone very well, but it's sometimes that friction, right? You're taught, hey, get that job, and then or go to school and get that job, and encouraging different forms of entrepreneurship, non-traditional types of areas of interest. As a community, we should support these endeavors, and it's tough sometimes, because we can see other family members go down different paths and not really see what the light is at the end of the tunnel, or how it might make sense. And so I was offered the guidance, again, that, hey, if it aligns with what you're interested in and you're truly passionate about it, you should really give your chance to explore that experience and explore that route. And so I share that with this group in particular, because um, right now, and where we're at as a community, there are so many different opportunities, non-traditional opportunities, to do very well, to do unique things that have never been done before. But it takes a level of courage, it takes a level of support. And so again, for those that may not have had that family history, or have those mentors to help them, it's not too late for members that are in this room to engage with younger generations and listen to what they're passionate and interested about, right? To support them in during those paths. And it's great to see musical artists like her, and Josh Jacobs, the NFL rushing champion. He's half Filipino, right? Like, so knowing and seeing that you have these other Filipino Americans out there doing these amazing things that may not be well known about. There's opportunities to share those types of stories, to get courage to do and explore, and find your own path, right? And I think that's, again, it goes back to saying that, hey, my parents can make it out of the fields and be very successful. My grandparents can survive a war, and make it from getting shot to doing so many amazing different things. Then I can take a chance, right? I can try something that no one has done before, and give it a go, because I believe in myself, right? And as I mentioned before, the struggles, the mental health struggles of our community, are quite large. So um, you know the importance of community support cannot be understated. Um, for some of the more senior folks on this call too, I mean, there's other things that you can do, and I'll get into that through educate and facilitate, right? The education component isn't just going to school. In fact, it's so many of the different live working experiences that are arguably more important, right? Beyond that, it's the connections that you can create to support. Like I said, taking an intern if you still own a small business, or are doing other side jobs, or even as the museum looks to expand, finding ways to take on new generations of Filipinos, I think could be an opportunity. Hiring Filipino, right? Giving those folks a chance. Just hearing about, and knowing the broad background of most Filipinos, um, most come from more challenged communities, right? Underserved communities, or educational backgrounds that aren't as strong. But it doesn't mean that there aren't talented individuals or those that can contribute in a more meaningful or significant way. And again, also giving kudos to the Filipino American National Historic Society. Again, it's connecting individuals, whether it's through these type of Zoom calls or community dance events or golf events, right, coming up. I think there's a great opportunity there to connect and share. Um, and this education, and I say this as a fairly young dad too, is it also can come in the form of help offering like babysitting, child support, like a grandkid or a niece or a nephew, taking them out, sharing those stories. Um, Education transpires there, that inspiration can happen there, and it's absolutely important, right? For a lot of different generations, to talk and see what's important to them, or what sharing and learning what's important to those new generations. I mean, having that dialogue can't be understated. So uh, again, back to some more of the fun pictures. Here's one with my grandfather with his two sons on a graduation day. Middle one's for me for my first time at Berkeley, and the last time is with the only other Filipino American male in my Haas MBA class. So two out of roughly two out of, I think it was 860 that day. So, when there's an opportunity to support some of these other individuals, you know, my request is to do. There's a question coming through from chat. From Edwina. Chris, can you advise organizations how nonprofits can connect with corporations like yours? That's an excellent question. I do help. I previously had background in endowment support, so I volunteered before for the Cupertino Educational Endowment Foundation. Berkeley has an endowment too, where I've met with them several times. Typically, it's an email. If they're specific questions from an investment perspective, that's my area of expertise. Happy to advise for free if there are certain questions that the group is facing. Another area that I saw that was utilized by another Filipino educational institution is corporate matching. Quite often, there are fundraisers that groups have, and corporations will match up to a certain dollar amount for donations. So continuing, and that could be like a niece or a nephew or whatever, working with them and their HR departments to get those corporate matches can also be very helpful for a nonprofit. But thanks, Edwina. That's a great question. Using artificial intelligence, I looked at one of the tools today, um, and literally looked up top issues facing the Filipino American community. Discrimination, racism throughout COVID. I think that's been heightened, right? With a lot of different forms of violence against the Filipino community. Immigration. There's still those that struggled with the whole DACA component. Um, and I know that universities like Berkeley are doing things in that by way of support for those individuals. Access to healthcare. Again, there's also some more of those cultural frictions, right, and things of just awareness as far as what a healthy diet is. I don't know what the percentage of Filipino families that actually have dietitians or have studies or formal knowledge on what's considered healthy balanced meals, but I'd argue it's as Filipino males, like we have a significant exposure to poor diets, high blood pressure, hypertension, high cholesterol, right? So education, as I mentioned before, it was tough seeing the low numbers of Filipinos as an undergraduate. As a graduate student, those numbers became even smaller. So again, supporting those, being supportive of education initiatives I think I can understand and that be tremendously helpful. Economic inequality. Um, that's something that was really unique and interesting from my perspective. It's interesting as well because for those of you who have friends or family members that have recently applied to colleges, right? They should have got their admission decisions in the past few weeks, and so um, I've noticed that there's a huge discrepancy on the types of institutions, the levels of support, the access, because there's so many different issues because of the economic inequality, right? Those typically, and I've seen this, you know, sitting in different boardrooms, those with more resources have more opportunities, and that's what's pushed me to try to expand my capabilities as a financial professional, right? So that way I'd be able to support more fully the organizations and groups from not just an economic but a policy perspective when it comes time to supporting the nonprofits that we're involved with. And then, as I mentioned before, mental health, right? That has been a huge issue for many young Filipino Americans, and continues to be an area where we see other issues or new issues arise, right? Through social media, through other forms of academic struggles, things of that nature. So, um, you know, what the Filipino American National Historic Society is doing is absolutely needed, because what I shared with you today is that our stories, the connectivity, the people here all have a lot of power and a lot of potential to help others, to inspire, to integrate, right, to engage, to help out future generations of Filipino Americans. And so, to wrap it up, call to action. As I mentioned before, no margin, no mission. Something I learned in my MBA course when I was taking, when I was interested in nonprofits. So support, this group and others however you can, when you can, because if there are no funds and you're not finding creative ways to support the institution, it's going to die out. So that, from my perspective, will definitely require connecting with other generations. Um, Engage to create new connections, as I mentioned before, mentorships, hiring, babysitting, whatever it is, volunteer work. Um, Listen and share your story. It's tremendously empowering for younger individuals, and you might think of creative ways to help connect or help boost their either mental health or even just their career standings, right? And so, tremendous opportunity. Another area, call to action, staying positive, supportive of new community developments, right? I mentioned some of the newest leaders, the diversity, right? Mixed race Filipino Americans, like this is great because then this is going to be an evolution that's going to continue to happen. Seeing others evolve and reach new political heights. California's Attorney General was Rob Bonta, a Filipino gentleman, reaching a very high and prestigious legal and political position, right? And so, um, what I'm sharing with you is that there's one thing that you can count on, and it's that continued evolution, right, of our community. And I think back in the day, there are a lot of different forms of friction or resistance or reluctance, but being open to hearing other stories and continue to do that, right? Continue to share and build and grow and create those connections, regardless of background, and building upon each other's successes. I think that's really a great step forward. And so, I'm going to stop it there. And the last bit um, I'm going to share one little clip that I was able to dig up from the documentary when my grandmother passed away recently. But I wanted to share. It was one of the questions when Erwin reached out. You know, what advice, what message would you give? Um, right? And so I want to kind of show you what was shared with me so that you can kind of connect the dots and listen to kind of, you know, what happened when I was behind the camera talking to my grandma.
No onions. What would you want them to hear from you? Hear for your voice when they look at this years from now.
I will tell them that they will try to look if they will finish their education, they will look for a good job, and so they will not be suffering like us, working so hard. And I want you to be more more comfortable than with so um,
That was grandma, and just thought I'd do honor her a little bit and just share again um, how, you know, her words and how it resonated with me. But again, as each of you, you know, connect with other family members of different generations and continue to have great events at the organization and at the museum. You know, again, I'm wishing you all the best and success, and hope that you can continue these different forms of community building. And I'll pause there if there are any questions. People, if they want to talk about investment markets, different worries from different groups from retirees to young Filipino Americans, happy to open up the floors again. At the bottom of the window, there's a chat button, and if you want to, um, you know,
Chris, I
to
think there's a couple of them in there now.
yeah, sure. Yeah. So let's take a look. And this one's coming from Gail. Chris, how can the nonprofit FANHS Museum with all volunteer staff be prepared to apply for financial assistance? Okay, this would be more in the realm of grant writing, I believe. If you're looking for
Yeah.
some of the different forms of financial support, you know, I that's not an area of my expertise, but I can definitely connect with other individuals that I have worked with. A former Berkeley professor was an executive director, and so I can find out what would qualify. I would also make some connections with other Asian American study professors at different local educational institutions, and see how they're going about getting their funding. Because if they're successful and they're using language, or there's certain groups that are constructed to their path, if the museum has operations or other you know, activities that are similar, it's quite easy, or I shouldn't say it's easy. It's the probability is increased of the success of retrieving. That's a great question, Gail, and I can write that down as a follow up for me, and I can try to get some more color and send that to Erwin.
Thank you,
Chris,
Chris. I had just a quick follow-up. I know in the past, we've applied for grants and tried to seek advice from grant writers. And one of the feedback statements that we did get from a grant writer was that we need to be grant ready. We need to be grant ready. And that's sort of a vague answer, but at the same time, I know there's some real specifics about being grant ready. And one of the things that always challenged my thinking was, does an all volunteer staff have a impact on a group or organization who's giving out funding?
I think it does, to be very honest with you, because when you look, and I think it comes down to the qualifications of each respective grant. But I do recall they would have salaried positions at the other. And of course, these were endowments that I were working with, so a little bit different than a museum. But I do recall that being part of some of the requests, right? For proposals, for these grant proposals, how many paid staff, how many part-time staff are salaried, those types. So those can be at times hurdles, if you will, right? That being said, I know different groups have found loopholes around it. That's not again not my area of expertise. Where I think you'd have to work with someone that's more well versed in the area. But again, I can do a little bit of research and try to circle up, at least from some of my endowment contacts. Their mandate's a little bit different than something like a museum, but you raise an excellent point. I do believe that can be like a filtering mechanism at times, depending on the grant.
So Christopher, I have a comment there. I've been sort of doing some research on grants, and yes, Mel, we have to be grant ready. Now, what does that mean? That means that we have to have specific missions, purposes. We have to have everything defined, and part of that would be to finalize a strategic plan, and that's what we're working on now. Because at the end of the day, they're going to ask you, well, why do you need this money? And we better be able to say that. And so right now, some of the initiatives that we're looking at, and we're early on getting this done, is that strategic plan. Why do we need this money? Why define, and then also do resource loading where you have a time continuum, paid staff, and why do you need that kind of thing? So you have to have all of that defined, and we're in the process of doing that. But again, it's with all volunteer staff, you can't expect a Six Sigma response. You have to kind of take into account people are volunteers. So that's where we're at right now as far as grants. Now, do we have the connections? Well, I think we do, but we have to have the blocking and tackling done before we ask for a grant. So anyway, that'd be my comment right now.
On a side note too, for the actual grant writing, there's actually a really strong tool called ChatGPT that actually produces a variety of different text response. So as you kind of circle up and round out your responses when you're going through this grant writing, it's a great tool that different professional writers and things like that. And so something to look at. And again, I can send some of those links along with this presentation if there's interest following the call.
Yeah, I'd like that.
Yeah, moving on to the next question. What advice can you give in selecting nonprofit governance board members? This is something that I'll go back to what the book says, book being my old nonprofit management when I was doing my MBA at Cal. Key components of hiring or bringing on nonprofit board members. Number one, fit, right? Do they fit well? Can they work well? Are we aligning with the mission? And the second and third is, are they going to level of support, right? Either support with their time, right? Are they bringing a unique skill? Maybe they have grant specific skills or something of that nature. I don't know, whatever the group needs. Or are they going to support with money, right? And just being very candid, those were some of the course keys when doing board selection that I can remember. Of course, it's been almost a decade now since I was in that course, but I think those still somewhat hold. Another question from Edwina. When did your grandparents arrive and where did you grow up? I grew up in San Jose. My grandparents emigrated to Delano, California.
So Chris, let me answer the entrance point of Hawaii for you. It was Kahuku, Hawaii. So I did a little bit of research on your grandpa.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Chris, traditionally what we do is we do a kind of a real quick roundtable, just in case somebody just has something on at the tip of their tongues. Perhaps for those of you that are still on the call, is there anything that anybody wants to cover here?
there's a lot of, Chris really excited my, I guess, historical background of volunteerism. And he hit on some really good subjects about, educational background. And when I think of educational background, traditionally, I thought of degrees, different types of degrees, PhDs, masters and stuff. But on the other hand, looking back on my past, I think social education is just as important, because when you talked about traveling overseas and getting out of your community and associating with people around the world, I think that type of education is emotional based, that drives you to focus in on a subject. And it appears that you became more focused the more you traveled and the more you associated with different people. And as I look at this screen, I see people from Seattle like Andres Senitonglan. He's one of the inspirational people up in Seattle. When I see Sam and Erwin, they're inspirational. Richard and Robert and Elena, Corey and Jay, these guys are all inspirational. And believe it or not, you get this inspiration and it keeps you going. As it doesn't matter how old you are, but it keeps the flame going. And that formal education, having a degree, is a major component in filling an economic thing. But on the emotional side, I think having talk stories like this, sharing stories, and to fire up that emotion, that you have a mission and focus on that mission and accomplish that mission. And I think in my past, I saw that. I being involved with FANHS gave me a purpose to focus on the mission. It gave me a purpose to focus on that mission because it was so important. And that's just my story. We all have our stories, and as far as I'm concerned, you're all, everybody that's on this call is inspirational to me, because I think of the time and effort they put into the FANHS organization to educate I think is creating a more inspiring view to the younger people like yourself. And the more you talk about how inspired you were to know about FANHS, it really makes me feel good as feedback from a younger generation that we're doing something right.
Thank you. No, again, what you all are doing are incredible, and it requires a level of thought and care. And I look forward to finding different ways that I might be able to help out too. So, looking forward to learning more about other stories and sharing and connecting. So thank you.
So if there's no others, I wanted to make a comment, Christopher. And it kind of, yesterday's meeting with the San Jose State Hawaiian Club kind of awoken some things. And one of the things that I run my life on is 6 Sigma, which is continuous improvement. It's a statistical probability of looking at yourself and being better. So if you were to do that and take the feedback from the youth yesterday, we need to change up some of our bridging tactics, because at the end of the day, I was looking at some of these kids and they were like, they could have been, their parents could have been my kids, kind of thing. So anyway, with that, I think that from our perspective of the museum, we have to really look at ourselves and look at what has worked in the past and what we think is going to work in the future. And with artificial intelligence, maybe we could work with you on that. Who knows? Final thoughts, Christopher, before we close up on this call?
No, again, I just wanted to thank everyone for the opportunity to share my story. I still think there are a lot of really amazing things ahead, and I look forward to seeing the continued growth of the FANHS Museum.
Thank you, Christopher. Before we leave, anybody else before we close this session here?
Yes, I have a quick question for Chris. I'm Edwina. I'm always the one answering the asking questions. But I just wanted to know, Chris, I think what we're dealing with, and I know that Erwin brought it up, is how do we connect with the next generation? What can we use as tools? Because we come from a different generation, we have different values, but it's really challenging to get the next generation to understand what we're doing and to get them on our page, because if they're not making money, it's not worth their, it's not worth their time. That's the bottom line. And we all went through it. So can you shed us some light on that in your closing remarks as to how we can bridge that generation to become involved and to understand how important the stories are and by connecting with our communities?
Yeah, and it's kind of what I do with my business. AI is at the highest level, pattern recognition. So what do Filipinos all get together to do, right? There's common interests, common things that we're all interested in, whether it be food-related activities, the arts, right? Golf and sporting events, or these types of functions tend to transcend a singular age group, right? So making sure that you're taking advantage of what you have set up, and as you look to choose from different events, because we all have a finite amount of time, you choose to deploy your resource or your availability at some of these upcoming events, whether it's a Filipino American play, or a music artist, like finding ways to bring in some of these key influencers or thought leaders, to have them to highlight these types of folks and connect. I think that's a great way, or a great start. That's what I would advise.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we pared this down to an hour and 2 minutes. If there's any questions,
I think Manong Robert needs to say something.
Yeah,
He's
Robert.
flagging.
But you're on mute, Robert.
you're on mute. Okay, continue on.
Unmute yourself, Robert. You're muted, Robert. You have to unmute. There.
There you go.
I'm sorry, I got so excited. I didn't know how to control this thing. Let me see if I can add something to that last question. That was, how do we reach the younger generation? Now, you just did some of that with the Bayani Club in San Jose State. So I'm familiar with that group. But among the colleges here in South Bay, like the community colleges, San Jose State and Stanford, they all have Filipino clubs. In fact, I've given talks to 2 community colleges, Stanford, and several at San Jose State, and the younger generation was in the audience. That includes not only just the Filipino Americans and the younger generation of Pinoys and Pinays, but Mexicans, Blacks. So there's also that same kind of ethnic issue with other groups. But what I find is that FANHS Santa Clara Valley chapter, with our Pinoy Town tours, our tours have practically all younger generation. So that's a way of that at least we are reaching out. So there's an avenue there. So I would say, like at Delano, there's probably the what's closest there, Merced. They're the community colleges. They probably have in Central Valley.
That'd be Bakersfield College or something like that.
Yeah, right. And they all have. And then I would say, do what at least what the Santa Clara Valley chapter is doing, and myself, is reaching out to the local community colleges. Through our Pinoy Town tours, we get a lot of people that come up to us and say, could you give us a talk? Or they say, we didn't realize what was going on in Filipino American history. Could we have another tour when we're bringing another group of people from the high school or something like that? So the connections exist. It's just pursuing them a little closer and a little more energy.
Robert, I want to make a comment as well as that Pinoy tours, the young people, some of the people actually went to high school with Christopher.
Oh,
Some of your
outstanding.
docents. Yes.
Right. And then, of course, Chris, you're a tremendous role model in your accomplishments. For a lot of the younger generation of your era, that's what third wave and fourth wave, right? And finally, I just want to make one more, I know I'm extending this, but Chris, do you know where your grandfather was a sakara in Hawaii? And what's his name?
Silvino Mina, Uncle, do you got the cities?
I do. I've already done all the research. It's Kahuku in Oahu. And I've got a lot of that already documented. So.
Okay, so that was Kabuko Plantation?
I have all the labor docs as well, Manong Robert.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay, we could do that. You probably answer the questions offline.
yeah.
All right, I yield.
Well, thank you, Manong.
Thanks, Erwin. And
All right,
thank you, Chris.
Go ahead. All right, before we go, I don't want to cut anybody off. Is there anybody else that want to say something before we close this? Okay, everybody, thank you very much for calling in. Terry, thank you for your support as always, and we will probably see this on YouTube. So we'll get the links out, and Terry, everybody, Gail, Chris, thank you very much. Joe, Sam, and also Edwina and Manong Robert and Jay Pilar. Thank you for coming in, and we're gonna continue this effort and this journey. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.
Again, Erwin.